Let's learn how to color correct your video in Premiere Pro. With the latest version of Creative Cloud, they have a very powerful color corrector built into Adobe Premiere Pro that really any colorist, unless you're doing a professional feature film, you might want to use a different program, but for anyone that's making videos on their own, you can color correct your footage very powerfully in Premiere Pro. Go up to your window and then change to your workspace to color. This will open up the Lumetri Scopes window over here, and then the Lumetri Color panel over here. And this is what we're going to be doing to edit our video. Select the clip that you want to edit, and then I just want to show you why we do that, because if we go over to our effects controls really quickly, nothing has changed. But as soon as we make any changes over here in the Lumetri Color panel, it will apply this Lumetri Color effect to this clip. So watch me as I just drag any of these sliders to the left. Check that out. The Lumetri Color panel effect applies over here, and it can be adjusted just like any effect, turned on and off. You can also adjust all of these sliders over here on the left, but it's harder to see and use, and that's why I use the Lumetri Color panel over here. So let me just delete that one more time, go back to my scopes, and I'm going to be showing you why we use scopes to color correct our footage. In this first video, we're just going over the basic correction tab over here. You can see that there's multiple tabs and multiple ways to edit your video, and we're going to go through all of these in the future lessons. But first, let's start with basic correction, going from the top to bottom. The first thing is input LUT. Now, you might have heard me mention before that we shot this video with a Sony camera that used a raw sort of format called S-Log3, meaning this doesn't have a lot of contrast already, it doesn't have a lot of saturation. We apply that afterwards. A LUT, or a lookup table, is sort of a filter that can be applied to this footage. Now, we shot in S-Log3, and you can actually install and find specific lookup tables for your camera and the way that you shoot online, or maybe it comes with your camera already. They don't have an S-Log3 input with the latest update to Creative Cloud. What I like to use is the Amira Rec 709. So if I click on that, you can see that it applies a look to this. Now, this doesn't look great. It's too bright, and we need to make some changes. But then we can go down to the rest of these things, say exposure, drop the exposure just a bit. If we need to add more contrast or less contrast, we can do that. But the lookup table is a place to start. So that's one way to edit your footage. I'm not going to use the lookup table though. I'm just going to edit this as if we didn't have any lookup tables, or as if you were shooting with your own camera and you didn't need to use a lookup table. So moving past the LUT, we have white balance. You have a white balance selector, which allows you to click on this color picker, find anything in your video that has no saturation, like something that's white or even something that's gray. It can't be overexposed though. So these behind Anthony, we had these curtains. Right here, it's a little bit too exposed right here. If I choose that, it doesn't really do anything because there's no information there. It's overexposed. But if I go over here where there's some gray, it does affect the temperature and the tint sliders. See, it added a little bit more blue and it added a little bit more magenta. We can go in here and add more blue if we want, or make it more warm. Say we didn't like that blue that I added, we wanted it to be a little bit more warm. We can do that just by dragging up or down on the slider. And same with the tint. We can drag to the left to make it more green, or to the right to make it more magenta. I'm going to undo that just by pressing Control-Z. Or Command-Z if you're on a Mac. You can also type in a specific number if you want by clicking on this number and typing in the specific number that you want to use. So that's how you quickly adjust the white balance. The color picker is the best way to do it if you have something in your clip that is white or neutral. Next, we have tone. all of these sliders adjust the brightness or the darkness of different parts of your footage. Exposure affects everything in your clip. So everything becomes darker, everything becomes brighter. To reset, you can just double click on the slider bar and it will reset to 0. Contrast, if I drag to the right, actually makes the darks darker and the brights brighter. And you can see over here, look at the scopes. See what's happening? First, let's go back to exposure. If I drag to the right, everything's becoming brighter because at the top of the scopes, it's the brights, it's the whites. At the bottom, it's the darks, it's the blacks. So if I go all the way to the left, everything becomes black. The goal is, if you have blacks and whites in your frame, to have some things touching 0 at the bottom and some things touching whites at the top, 100. So with contrast, when we add contrast, it's expanding the colors or the brightness and darkness. And because this image is so flat, this is good. We want to add contrast. So you can do that with the contrast slider. You can also do that with the rest of these sliders down below. The highlights will just adjust the highlights, the bright parts of the footage. The shadows will just adjust the shadows, the darker parts. The whites and the blacks are even brighter and even darker. So the whites are just the really highlight parts, and the blacks are the very dark parts of your frame. So with the blacks, we're really going to crank these down quite a bit. Same with the shadows, trying to get the bottom of this graph to touch. And that's because we do have some pure black things in this footage. So this camera lens right here, that's pure black. So that should actually be very close to the bottom. And we have whites up here with the curtains behind. So those should be close to the top. Now I'm going to do that, but I'm also actually going to bring down the highlights so we don't overexpose Anthony's face. You can see though, one issue we're having is that this image is very unsaturated. Thankfully, we have this saturation slider. And when we're shooting with S-Log3, it's very unsaturated. So if we drag the saturation all the way to the right, we're getting more to a natural look. If 200 isn't enough, we can actually type in something higher than where the slider goes. 250 might be a little bit too much, 225. That might be exactly where we want to be, or close to it. So this is the basic color correction tab. This is where you want to start. This is where a lot of people just stay. You don't even have to go down to all of the rest of these effects in the Lumetri panel. You can get a pretty cool and pretty proper color correction here. If we want to take it a step further to grading, I just want to explain really quickly what grading is versus color correction. Grading is giving it more of a stylistic look. And that's what we're going to be doing mostly with the rest of these tabs, giving it more of a style, more of a cool filter. That's what a grade looks. Warming it up to make it look happier because it's warmer, or cooling it down to make it look more depressing or sad. And we can do that with things like the sliders up here, but you can really do it with some of these sliders and tools down below. So in the next video, we're going to move on to the creative panel. And for now, just play around with the basic correction and start practicing with the clips that you have on your own sequence.